Well, welcome, welcome. It is Thursday. That means this is the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. Robert Hilliard in the other box. I'm Whitnie Wiley, and we are here talking all things leadership. This week, we are talking about decisions. Continuing our discussion about decisions. And today we'll be talking about what holds you back, what keeps you from making those effective decisions, what gets in your way, and how you can move through it. So, any opening thoughts, Robert, before we dig in?
No, I'm just excited to talk about this. This is a great topic.
So if you have not been with us the past couple of weeks, this is actually part 3. In part 1 of our 4-part series, we talked about what decisions are and why making effective decisions is important, right? Why you need to do that. And then last week in part 2, we discussed several processes or strategies that you can use to help you make your decisions. And some of them are used under particular situations, and others you can use in any situation. So we would invite you, if you have not been with us the first 2 weeks of this series, to go back and watch them. The links will be made available to you. This week, we're shifting to what's keeping you from making effective decisions, and in some instances, making decisions at all. Sometimes we let the things that get in our way and we don't make a decision. But remember, and we touched on this before, not making a decision is actually making a decision. Mm-hmm. So even though you may think, well, I didn't make a decision, you did, because something is always happening, right? Nothing stays static in this world. So if you don't actually make a decision, that doesn't mean things aren't going to move forward. And so the default is whatever happens, that's what you get. But what are those things that get in your way? So I want to take a quick step back for a second. Companies, yours, Robert's, mine, whomever's, right? Whether you work for someone else or you're self-employed, you're in business for one reason, and that is to solve the problems of your customers, clients, or constituents, depending on what you have and the nature of your organization. You're solving problems, right? And solving problems requires that decisions be made along the way. But in business, you're not only solving your customers or your clients' problems, you no doubt have some of your own that pop up, particularly if you are a leader of people, right? Where there are people, there is conflict. And conflict is simply one type of problem that you can have, or some feedback that you can get that tells you that something's not quite right, and some decisions need to be made about how you want to move forward. And none of that can happen if you don't know where it is you want to go and what you want to move towards. So what gets in your way depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. And the first one we're going to talk about is bounded rationality. And if I know Robert,
you're not going to ask me to define that, right?
I'm not going to ask you to define it. Although I bet you could. I bet you could. I'm going to share a little cartoon that sort of lays this thing out for us, and then I'll define it or explain it. Although, again, I think so let me see if I can get this up. So as I'm talking about it, you can read the cartoon strip for yourself. I believe that's Dilbert, right? Okay. It does actually. It says
Absolutely.
Dilbert
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
I'm not a someone who reads Dilbert all the time. Every now and then I catch a strip, and I was like, oh, that's funny. I should read it more often, but I don't. That's my decision. That's one of my decisions not to do that. But basically, bounded rationality. So you don't know everything, right? You don't know everything. I don't know everything. Robert knows almost everything, but even Robert doesn't know everything. And then there are things that maybe you can't learn or understand, or at least understand in the amount of time within which the decision that you need to make needs to be made. And your inability to grasp that may result in inability your inability to grasp that may result in you not being particularly rational about the situation and understanding the alternatives. And so, one of the things that you want to do in order to overcome this is, one, just simply accept that you don't know everything, right? And if you don't let the fact that you don't know everything get in the way, then you can open yourself up to alternatives. And the challenge that we have is that we don't often want to admit when we don't know things, right? Particularly as leaders.
Absolutely. One of the things that I tend to just break it down to ego, right? Your ego gets in the way. You don't want to say that, I don't know this, or you have this conflict where you think that, well, I'm the leader, I'm supposed to know everything. And of course, we know that not every people don't know everything. And so it's okay to say, I don't know, call. And if you have experts there, call on them, let them share their information so that you can make an informed decision. So that's one of the things that I see, when you talk about that.
Absolutely. I've had the situation. I don't know that it was necessarily that they couldn't grasp the situation, but certainly in the amount of time, the world that I come from, most recently before working for myself full time was the legal field, did legislative work. And it's often that or I was trying to explain something to someone. And I think one of my gifts, I guess, is to be able to take complicated concepts and break them down into something simple. But even then, I wasn't always able to do that with people who were responsible for making decisions. And so I'm trying to explain complicated legal concepts that have an impact on the work that we were doing, or the potential that some particular legislative path would have down the line to result in an unintended consequence, right? Some unintended effect. And if someone can't get to that point, right, they're just staying with what they know. And it keeps them from being able to explore, oh, that's a possibility. That's an alternative way that I can go. And it was, I will say this, it was a little bit frustrating because it's imperative, I think, that particularly when you're making decisions about things that affect thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, right, that you not get stuck in a place where this is the outcome that I want, and I'm not willing to look at alternatives, whether it's has to do with language or approach, to try to get to the end result that you want that doesn't bring those unintended consequences along with it. So it was something that I had in my life a lot. It's not so much a big part of my life now, but in the work that I was doing, it was.
No, that makes a lot of sense. People tend to want really simple answers.
They do. They do. And it's funny, before we got started, you were talking about the election. And, you know, I think the same thing applies there. There is a lot of stuff swirling around, and some of our, and I'll say the universal we, right? Some of our inability to grasp some very challenging and complex issues in a way other than the way we're choosing to look at it, presents a problem. So
yeah. I think another side of that, I know you want to continue, but I want to
no.
that. I think another issue, and it's interesting because I was talking about a friend before we started this broadcast, and one of the things that my friend has a hard time dealing with is the fact that things are now very complex. It's not like it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And what ends up happening is when you want things to be simple and you're looking for simple answers in a complex situation, you are always going to be disappointed, because it's not, things are not the way they used to be. You can't just say, okay, it's option A, B, and C. Well, not anymore. There's a whole lot of different paths that you can take, and you have consequences. Each one of those paths have their own consequences, or many consequences.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Another thing that gets in a way is the escalation of commitment. Do you remember this one?
A bit.
Escalation of commitment, right? This is when you remain committed to a poor decision, right? You have to get to a place where you accept that poor decisions happen, and it's an opportunity to overcome mistakes. Learn something like a new skill, a tool, or a resource that can help you in the future. But we get in this place where we, have made a decision or not made a decision, maybe, and we just continue down the path because, again, we don't want to admit what we don't know. We don't want to admit that we made a mistake. And so we commit, the commitment continues even though it shouldn't. But there's a balancing act here, right? Because you need to go far enough with your decision to find out if it's working for you or not, or if there is another path, whether or not you've gotten the extra information that maybe you need in order to take what seems to be a poor decision and turn it into a better decision.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that seems to ring a bell.
I can't imagine this has ever happened in your life.
Every day. No. It's, and again, and I hate to be so simplistic about this, but it's the inability to remove the ego from situations. So that's when we started talking about this, and I a couple of weeks ago, and I started writing some notes down. I put a couple of things down on paper, and one of them, the two things that stood out for me were ego, low EQ. So and it seems that regardless of what we call these technical terms or definitions, when you look at it, it's usually one of those two things. And the third one I'll throw in there is not enough information. You don't have enough information to make a decision or to make the proper decision.
No, I agree. I agree. And it's so much of what we talk about just boils down to a couple of different things. We give them new names over time, right? And every generation, every author wants to have their stamp in the field. And so they take something, they tweak it, and put a new name on it. We've done the same thing, and
we do it all the time. Yeah, you and I do it all the time, right?
We've done the same thing. So,
right.
But the bottom line is, and a lot of this, like Robert said, boils down to ego and this unwillingness or this desire not to be seen as someone who doesn't have the answer, who makes mistakes. And unless the mistake is fatal physically or to your business, I mean, like really results in the end of your business, there are opportunities to learn. And I think we've talked about this. And if we haven't, we should. Learning organizations, right?
Right.
And it's an opportunity for you and the people that you lead to actually learn and grow through what you go through, rather than being so concerned and consumed with getting it right that you learn something from it. Because if you're always concerned about getting it right, you're going to make lots of mistakes. You're actually going to bring those mistakes along, because, and we're going to talk about a couple of other things, of some other factors that will get in your way. And one of the things that Robert mentioned was lack of information, right? You can make ineffective decisions or poor decisions because you don't have all the information. And the question becomes, why don't you have all the information, right? And there, like many things, is a balancing. You can't wait until you have every single piece of information, but you have to have enough information, the adequate amount of information and the adequate quality of information in order to make those effective decisions. And of course, the thing is, how do you know when that's happened?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, right? Because we've talked about that personally. You and I have talked about that. How much information do you need? How many things do you need in order to make a decision? And sometimes, and we touched on this last episode, sometimes you need to decide that you have enough and step out there and make those adjustments as you go, because that's the whole choose a direction, not a destination thing, because things are constantly shifting. And so you need to be able to have your eyes open enough to gather more information as you are moving in your direction, so that you can course correct when you need to. So I think those things are really important. And the other thing, and I want to say this really quickly, I can't remember the author. She's a pretty famous, prominent coach. I was reading one of her books, and I will do some research and remember what book it is. It was a while ago I read the book. And she was talking about some of the things, that prevents pretty much the same thing here. There are traps that we get ourselves into when we're trying to make decisions. We're looking for actions. We're moving ourselves forward. And she used an example of someone not knowing something. I think it was in a workshop that she gave, and she was talking about, here's some, I need you to find the answer to this particular situation. And of course, there were some people that couldn't get the answer. And she says, well, how did that feel? And they were like, well, it feels bad. And she was like, well, that's what it feels to learn. That's what it feels like to learn. And sometimes we equate learning things with not knowing something. It's different.
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant, because it was like, you don't know it, and then somebody else has the answer and you feel bad because you didn't know the answer. But she goes, that's what it feels like to learn. And we confuse that, and we put such an emotional attachment to that it sometimes hampers us. So we have this notion that we always have to be right, because we don't want to experience that feeling. So I just want to throw that out there.
I love that example, and thanks for sharing. And I'd love to get that information and share it with the audience too. It's interesting. One of the things that is important that I don't think we talk about enough, and it actually is this concept of feeling. right? That we're so much in our head sometimes that we don't stop to think about and analyze the feelings that we have. And so understanding what you just said, that if you have a feeling, if you can identify what it is and what it's attached to, then you can make some other decisions, right? Not about the problem that you're solving, but about how you go about it, the process that you use, recognizing that, oh, if this is what it feels like to learn, I didn't die. Right, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, but that's what that feel like, that being uncomfortable, right? That sense of and the thing we say, we've got to get to a place where we can be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so recognizing what it feels like to be uncomfortable, what it feels like to not have the answer and still be respected, right? Because what we're concerned with is what other people are thinking about us, right? What they're thinking about us. Will they respect me if I don't have the answer all the time? And I'll say this, people who, if you're concerned that people won't respect you because you don't have the answers all the time, I'm telling you, they don't respect you because you act like you do.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing for leaders, especially very high level leaders, because people are not usually forthcoming with that feedback. And so it can be very difficult to get the proper feedback. And if you're only used to getting glowing accolades or praise as that leader, whether you're the CEO or other, CFO, COO, when you don't get that, it can feel like learning. But that's all it really is. It's just information. You're getting that information, and we all have it. I have it myself. We get attached to positive feedback, but a lot of times we don't get the really actionable information from only positive feedback.
Yeah. The next one is sort of the opposite of this. So if there's a lack of information, it hinders your ability to make effective decisions. Information overload does the exact same thing, right? When you've got too many options, there's too much going on, and so you don't quite know what to do, right? Too many options, you're overwhelmed to the point that you're frozen, can't pull the trigger, so to speak. And so there's, again, this balancing act that you have to have of how much information do you need to solicit? How much feedback do you need to have in order to be able to make a decision? And you don't want to get to a point where it's so much that you can't. And this reminds me, I don't know if this was something that I learned in school or somewhere else, but it has to do, it was an example about toothpaste. And about manufacturers of toothpaste and having too many options, right? It is like simple things, even in our lives. If there are too many options, then we don't know which way to go, right? I don't know which toothpaste, if it needs to have tartar control or sensitivity, if, brighteners, if it need, the peppermint, spearmint, maybe it's cinnamon. It's like it doesn't matter. It's toothpaste. Pick a toothpaste and move on. And so, I thought that was something that, just a very simple example. And I think I was in taking a marketing class, and they were talking about, presenting too many options for your customers to the point where they can't think straight. And it happens when you're in a restaurant, right? And some restaurants are notorious for too many options. Just Cheesecake Factory comes off the top of my head,
Are they
right?
still around?
Yeah, in California they
Okay.
are, and it's like a 40-page menu. Who needs that many options, right? And so then you end up wondering why you have the same thing over and over again, because you get to a point where you can't deal with all the information, and you just go, I'm just going to make a decision. Or the waiter is standing over you, right, trying to get your order, and so you feel like you've got to make this decision. So information overload is sort of the opposite of lack of information. But again, this and many of the others is about finding a balance, a place where you can get what you need and then pull the trigger. And then, as Robert said, test along the way, right? You can make sure that the decision that you made and the action that you're taking and the direction that you're going is the one that's leading you where you're trying to go. And if it's not, be flexible, be willing to make some adjustments. And I'll just say this, the lack of information in information overload, in that sort of the pressure that comes along with that, right? It creates stress because you feel like you're just under a time constraint. It leads to rash decision making because you don't have what you need, or you have too much of what you need, and it creates pressure that is part of all of this.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And one of the things that people that really study and teach and talk about VUCA, and we talked about VUCA last time, they say you have what's called safe to fail experiments that you test along the way, but you're testing in a way that if you fail, it's not going to make everything fall apart. So safe to fail experiments. And that's really important, a really important part of this. So as you're going along, make those safe to fail experiments so that you can get information and find out what's working and what isn't.
Right. And all of this works together because it goes back to the escalation of commitment. If you find out through the safe to fail, you're testing assumptions and the path that you're moving on, and you find that it's not working, right? That you don't want to remain committed to something that's not working, assuming that you gave it enough time to really find out whether or not it was or not, right?
Correct.
And you don't want to just stick with it simply because you made the decision to go that way. It just simply means you need to make some adjustments. You've got to be flexible as a part of this process. Flexibility is your friend. You can say that. Flexibility is your friend.
It is.
Another thing that gets in our way, and I'm pretty sure I know what Robert will say about this, are biases, right? We all have biases. These preconceived notions that we have about how things are or how they should be, right? And should be it's a killer, right? When you think things should be this way, or it should have worked out a particular way, the bottom line is things are the way they are, and they're working out the way they're working out. And if it's not going, just the simple acceptance of that, right, relieves, I think, a lot of pressure. But the problem with bias in decision making is that we tend to give our beliefs more attention and ignore outside beliefs, right? Other people's beliefs. my beliefs are way more important, and therefore I'm committed to my biases despite any information I may be getting to the contrary, because it's my belief. And while there are physiological, psychological, human behavior reasons for that, doesn't help your decision making. And so recognizing that it is a challenge or could be a challenge for you just means you need to test your beliefs, test your biases.
I totally agree. A lot of times it boils down to, are you a binary thinker, right? Are you, or can you hold many possibilities? Not everything is a binary decision, this or that. And sometimes the you know, the, I don't want to say that can coexist with the this, but both can be true. Both can be good decisions. It was funny because I just had a conversation with an 11-year-old the other day.
You said another 11-year-old?
No, yeah. and I was saying, they were saying about this influencer, and they agreed with this influencer, and I was like, okay, I don't agree. And they were upset. I said, it's okay if you agree with that. I can also disagree. But in their mind, because they're a kid, was like, well, if I like it, everybody has to like it too. And I was like,
the sad part of that is you said because they're a kid, but there are plenty of adults that have that, and that becomes the problem.
I was being nice. But it's true, but it's, you can like that. And it was funny. And I'll give you a really interesting, it was fascinating. And you know me, I'm always collecting the data, right? Which is a great thing and a terrible thing. It's a blessing and a curse. I was watching the reaction and they were getting upset, and I wasn't being me. I was like, well, it's okay if you agree with that person. I don't agree. It's okay. And they were, you're saying I'm wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. And I, of course, you know me, I was trying not to laugh, but I'm like, because I'm like watching the reaction and going, wow, this is fascinating. I was laughing at myself going, this is fascinating how upset this person is getting. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm telling you that I disagree. There's a difference.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
There is a difference. And so the interesting thing in how that plays out in teams is that if you are in a space where if people don't agree with you, your beliefs, your assumptions, your biases, then they are either calling you wrong or there's something wrong with them, you're going to have problems in your team. Right? Because now you're creating and possibly escalating conflict in a way that doesn't need to happen, rather than just accepting that everyone comes to the table with their biases, with their worldviews, with their experiences, and that all of them are valid in the context of gathering the information in order to be able to make the decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there you have a couple of different things in there. You have biases in there, and you also, there's a little bit of ego in that reaction as well. There's a little bit of learning in that, because you know me, because when I give my reason, I had to educate as well. So there was a lot, and quite possibly another reason for that reaction that I was getting was the fire hose effect, right? There's all these different things going on at the same time as I'm explaining why I disagree. There's educating going on, there's emotions happening. And so that's something that we also need to be aware of. And that's another level of complexity. You add all these different layers on top of that.
And so uncertainty is the next one that I want to talk about. And we've talked about this to some degree. You can't, just like you can't know everything in terms of the information that is needed in order to make decisions. You can't know every outcome all the time, right? And it means that you have to make decisions without knowing how things are going to turn out. Mm-hmm. Right? You're not always, you can do your best thinking. You can put your best people on it. You can have all the information and think it's going to turn out a particular way, and it just doesn't, right? There are variables that have effect on whether or not things are going to turn out a particular way. That's what science is all about. Right. And if uncertainty was going to be a problem for scientists, we wouldn't know a lot of the things that we know, because they wouldn't do any experiments. They wouldn't test anything. And then they wouldn't learn, and then we wouldn't know the things that we've learned from them. And so it's important that you recognize uncertainty is just a part of the game. Is just a part of what is. And so you gather the information, you don't know how it's going to turn out. You are moving in a direction that you think is going to get you the outcome that you want. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And then you follow through with the decision, testing things along the way until you get what you want, making adjustments. I think I said this. It's a concept that I've gotten from Jack Canfield. Robert alluded to it earlier. Jack Canfield calls it ready, fire, aim. It may not be original to him, but the concept is that you get the information, you make a decision, you take the action, fire, and then you aim by making adjustments, micro adjustments, macro adjustments, whatever is needed. And then you fire again and see if you can't start closing in on your target, right? Sometimes you just have to take action, regardless of whether or not you are clear and certain about what the outcome is going to be.
Okay. No, yeah, uncertainty can be crippling. Especially, and this ties into what you said before, know your biases, because one of your biases could be that you need to have, all the information. You need to know what's going to happen. And so when you have a solution that could be the best one for you, because there's the uncertainty there, you won't choose it, you won't try it. And so you may miss out on something because of that. So that's a key point. I also wanted to point out to you, you see me looking off to the side here, because I wanted to make sure I got the resource that I was mentioning before. And I don't use my screen here. I was using my phone because it would look weird me going like this while you're talking. What's he doing? So it's the author that I was talking about is Jennifer Garvey Berger. And the book is called Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps, How to Thrive in Complexity. That's the book where it said, this is how it feels to learn. She was talking about one of the mind traps in there.
Okay, awesome. If you put that in, I think you can put it in our private chat. I can cut and paste it and paste it into the comments, or you may be able to put them in the comments.
We shall see.
We've never tried that in the middle of a show. So we'll learn something new. If you can put a comment in, go for it. If not, put it in the chat. I'll cut and paste and put it in the comments.
Oh my goodness, this is uncertainty right there. This is perfect.
And so, and while you're doing that, I'm actually was going to share a story about uncertainty and its crippling effect, uncertainty. So a few years back, I went to Tony Robbins, and I was not aware of sort of the 6 human needs as he outlines them. One of which is certainty, and interestingly enough, uncertainty. So we all have all 6 of the human needs: certainty, uncertainty, contribution, love, significance, and there's one more that escapes me at the moment. But what I know about myself, what I really learned about myself at that time was that certainty is very high. I think it was the number one, my number one human need. And I was wondering why I was having difficulty making a decision and taking action on something that I wanted to do. Um, and what I learned was that my need for certainty is what was keeping me from moving forward.
Hmm.
And the particular situation was I was in a job. I've talked about this before. I was in a job that I was not particularly happy in. And I wanted to leave. I was having difficulty making, convincing other people that I needed to be working somewhere else. I'll just leave it at that. And my husband said to me, work for yourself. You're as smart as this person. You are more than capable of doing blah, blah, blah. Do it, just start, do your thing full time, leave your job. And I couldn't because of this need for certainty about where money was coming from, right? How we were going to keep a roof over our head, right? And so it kept me for the longest time, which taps into this thing is uncertainty, and then it feeds fear, right? And that's what it was for me. This fear, and the fear was of the unknown and having to start all over again, and what people would think, and this whole host of things.
Sure.
But what happens is when you understand what's going on, and the reason we're talking about these challenges and obstacles is because if you can see it happening in your decision making, you can address it.
Yeah.
If you don't know what the problem is, you don't know what's getting in your way, why you're stuck, why you're not making the kinds of decisions or using a process that leads you to decisions that are working for you, serving you and your team, understanding what's getting in the way can help. And so once I sort of got some clarity on that, and it was just simple, it's like, oh, you need to know this. And what I did was I'm a planner, and I was planning. And as I was planning everything and looking for every obstacle, I kept using that as an excuse not to pull the trigger and go, because I was like, oh, I need to make sure I address this, and I need to make sure I address this. And what if this pops up? So again, you can look for so much information, so much data, that you use it as a reason not to decide, not to take action and move on.
I was laughing because, as you know, your story is similar to mine, although that mine was, there you go. Make sure I spelled everything correctly.
It's too late now.
It's up there. It looks good. But it was really interesting because I had the conversation with you when we were talking, when I was like, well, I'm in between jobs right now. I should start looking for, and you were like, well, just do your own thing. And I was like, well, you're like, well, we're supposed to be doing stuff together. I was like, oh yeah. But you remember that conversation?
I do remember that conversation. I got to have that conversation with you because I had that conversation with my husband and then with myself. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So you were able to see it. And so that's how you learn. And, it's very rare. It's an amazing thing. It's very rare that we get that feedback, and we can see those things, especially when it comes to ourselves and our decision making and our leadership. It's a gift, and it comes so rarely. And I don't usually use the word disappointing, but it is disappointing when leaders don't take advantage of that, because it's so rare that they actually get that. You would be surprised, maybe not, Years ago, I was facilitating a 360 feedback, and it was like the first time that this organization was doing. I'm laughing, but it really wasn't funny at the time. Was doing it, and this was an organization that was very autocratic, um, dictatorial, command control, and it was the first time that these leaders were going to see how their staff, peers, and their bosses thought about them. And when I explained what a 360 was, and that their employees would be contributing, you would not believe the terror and fear and anger that these leaders so we were in the boardroom. They were frantic. And they were like, can we get out of this? Like, this is the CEO deciding that we're going to do this. It has nothing. This is not something that I'm implement. I created, the survey. I said, but this is the CEO saying that they want to do this, but because they were terrified that they were going to get negative feedback, because they were like, well, and by the way, if you're worried about that, then you probably should look at your leadership. If you're worried that that your employee is going to be like, okay, now it's my turn, then you have some growing to do.
Absolutely.
And that certainly did happen in some cases. I had some, I don't want to go there right now, but I just want to that's for another show. But we'll just say that it created such dissonance with these folks. Instead of looking at it like an opportunity to see, to get that rare glimpse of their leadership, they were filled with apprehension. Yeah. Exactly. It's like,
yeah. So, the bottom line, reiterating what Robert said, that all of this is simply opportunity, right? Is opportunity. And if you have clarity about who you are, where you want to go, what kind of leader you want to be, where you want to go, the kind of decision maker you want to be, taking into account all of the information that we provided, the tools, the resources, the strategies that we provided, and today, looking at these opportunities to sort of look inside to see what's having an impact on your decision making, you're going to grow from it and be a better leader just because you've gone through the process. So, any final word?
Yeah.
Words.
I was like, how can I say this in one word? I think is when you make a decision, just be aware of where it's coming from. The next time you make a decision, just be aware of what's prompting you to decide this way. Create some self-awareness, which is one of our guiding principles, is self-awareness. So really find out, what are you basing it on? Are you basing it on your biases? Are you basing it on your mental models? Are you basing it on your emotions or your ego? Really take a look at where it's coming from. I think that's important.
I concur. So with that, we are at the end of this episode, and we want to thank you for joining us. The State of Leadership. We are on live on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And if you want to get in touch with Robert, I will put his contact information here. You can reach him at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. Inspire me at roberthilliardcoaching.com. Reach out to Robert. He's a fabulous executive coach, and he can help you be the executive that you want to be. And then I also want to invite you, if I'm more your flavor, then check me out You can book a strategy session with me at Shift. You could go to shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. While you're there, you can pick up a copy of, I've got 3 ebooks there that you can get, as well as booking a strategy session. So again, you can contact Robert, book a session with him. You can book a session with me. We would love to talk to you about how we may be able to help you, whether it's an individual coaching, group coaching, or some organizational development consultation. We are available to you. And until next time, take care.
Bye now.